Today we continue on with our NHL offseason plan series. We look at the top team from the NHL's regular season, the Florida Panthers. They might have finished first in the regular season, but they had an early playoff exit. What will we see this team do to get over that hump for next year? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're looking at the Florida Panthers and their off-season plan. So if you're new to this series, obviously we still have a couple teams left. And even though this team is number 1 in the NHL's regular season, what we did is we started at number 32, worked all the way up to number 1. But of course, I left teams out as they were still playing in the playoffs. So the Avalanche and the Lightning videos will be done once the Stanley Cup final has been completed. But if you're new to the series and you haven't caught many of the other videos, essentially we're going to recap the 21-22 season, take a look at some team and player stats to see how things went. We're going to analyze their salary cap space, take a look at expiring contracts that they need to deal with this offseason, and then address the top burning questions as the team goes into the offseason here. Now, as I mentioned, let's start with the 21-22 regular season recap. So this team was phenomenal regular season, the greatest regular season in team history. 122 points with a record of 58-18-6. Absolutely amazing season. They were by far the highest scoring team in the NHL with 337 goals. Not only were they first, but like I said, that was first by a good margin at that. Goals against was pretty respectable as well, 242 for 12th best. The power play was really, really good again, 24.4% for number 5 in the NHL. And the penalty killing was mediocre, but respectable, 79.5 for 16th best. So certainly fair to say that the defensive side of the puck for this team is the main area to get better at. Obviously, offensively speaking, they're an elite team, one of the tops, if not the best in the NHL. Like I said, they certainly had a tremendous regular season, the greatest one in franchise history. We saw Jonathan Huberdeau lead the way with 115 points. Barkov had a phenomenal year. We saw a breakout season from Mason Marchment, 47 points in 54 games. That's incredible for him. We had 4 30-goal scorers on this team as well. They picked up some great players at the deadline, like Claude Giroux, Ben Chirot. They moved out Frankie Vetrano, of course, who went on to have a pretty good run with the Rangers. Owen Tippett left town. He was part of that Giroux trade. They ended up losing in round 2 to their state rival, the Tampa Bay Lightning, who is now playing for the Cup final for the 3rd consecutive year, trying to win their 3rd consecutive championship here. Of course, they defeated the Washington Capitals in round number 1, which was a pretty good series. They looked like they were going to be down here. They came back to take that series, but ended up losing consecutively here in a sweep to the Lightning. So it's not even so much that they lost to the Lightning, it's more how they lost. And you can see that the Lightning just had more will, and obviously a little bit more commitment to defense as well. The Panther power play, even though it was really good in the regular season, got cold. The Lightning were shutting them down. They were becoming too predictable. And to me, I just wasn't sure that the coaching staff had the answers on how to adjust. And it was just that simple. But you could tell the difference between the will for the Lightning just blocking every shot. Once they get a sniff that they're able to close things out, they're relentless. And the Panthers obviously could probably learn a little bit from that. So now let's jump over and look at their salary cap situation for the current season, see how where things stand. Right now, they have 17 NHL contracts on the book for the 22-23 season. They also have $6.5 million in dead salary cap space due to a couple of buyouts that are still on their books, predominantly the Keith Yandel buyout and goaltender Scott Darling, which was bought out a little while ago, but unfortunately for the Florida Panthers, still on the books. So those 2 buyouts total about $6.5 million on the cap for the coming season. So that only gives them $3 million available because the cap obviously is 82.5. They have over 72.4, so it's basically just over $3 million that's available. And they have some interesting contracts to look at. So to me, this team is going to have to make some tough decisions. So clearly, once you see the list here in a second for their upcoming players that need new deals, it's going to be impossible to keep everybody. And the ones that are expiring, they might have to rely on the team maybe moving out money in other areas in order to get re-signed. So let's take a look at those contracts now. Your RFA list is kind of short. Of course, you got Luostarinen and Lucas Carlson. So those 2 players, to me, likely will get qualified. I don't have any concerns that way. Don't really think either one's in line for a huge payday by any means. but certainly, had their case of being valuable enough for sure. The UFAs on this team include deadline acquisition Claude Giroux, Noel Acciari, Mason Marchment, who, like I said, had a career season. Jumbo Joe Thornton, no indication yet on his future if he wants to try to play another year, or will he retire from the NHL? Will he head to play in Switzerland, which was something that he had indicated a long time ago that he'd like to do at the end of his career, but we don't know if he and still intends to do that. Maxim Mammon, of course, Ben Sherratt, another deadline acquisition who did have a pretty good fit there. You get Robert Hagg as well, another player acquired, and Marcus Nudavara, who missed most of the year due to injury. So certainly some interesting names. I mean, you have to think that the future of Claude Giroux is probably, right at the forefront here, and Mason Marchment as well. Like I said, the two RFAs that they have, they're not going to get paid a lot of money, but, even if they're making a bit more than they did this current season, that's still, they only have $3 million, so that's not much money. That's going to make things awfully tough. And like I said, and not only that, but you get a look at the future too, right? So, even if guys like Hagg and Sherratt and Nudavara don't come back, which I don't really think there's going to be any option to because of the cap situation, then you get Mammon and Thornton. I would not expect them back. Acciari may not be back, but I would think that the Panthers would have heavy interest in retaining Giroux and Marchment. I mean, Marchment bounced around with a few other teams and finally found his game at the NHL level and really contributed here well for the Florida Panthers. I mean, it wouldn't be the end of the world for them to lose him, but at the same time, I would think there'd be interest, right? So we'll have to see here. But what are those top questions facing this franchise as this team tries to move forward? Now, the one big question we were going to have for the Florida Panthers leading into the early part of their season since it ended was who was going to be their new head coach. Was Andrew Brunette going to be back? And of course, in the last few days here, we found out the answer to that. No, Andrew Brunette will not be back as head coach. They moved on and hired Paul Maurice, who's a very well-experienced coach, one of the all-time leader in wins, but he's also right up there. I think he's at the top as well when it comes to losses as well. I mean, Paul Maurice has really not had a great track record. I mean, seems like a really good coach. He's had a fair bit of regular season success. He's been to the later rounds of the playoffs a couple of times, but for the most part, hasn't really been a greatly successful coach in terms of winning a Stanley Cup or being deep in the playoffs on a consistent basis. Now, of course, it's not all on the coach because obviously it does depend on where you're coaching, and the players are obviously the ones on the ice doing the work. So as much as I know, I can see here that the Florida Panthers really look like they really value experience. It sounds like after how they lost against the Tampa Bay Lightning, it wasn't so much that they lost. I think it's how they lost and the fact that Brunette, to me, just didn't have the answers to change things up, and I think that was a major red flag for Zito and Panthers ownership that they wanted to bring in a more experienced coach. It sounds like they have offered Brunette a opportunity to stay with the organization, but as of right now, we haven't really heard whether he's going to accept or not, but most people feel he's likely not going to accept after being passed up for the head coaching job, but he's, after being a finalist for the Jack Adams and having a real solid year, besides the playoff loss, I think he might be more likely to move on, and there could be some hard feelings there. At least that would be my guess on what NHL reporters are saying. But after a real solid, record-setting season, we now have yet another new coach in Florida, and Paul Maurice will be at the helm and see if he can take them over the hump here and have more playoff success next year. Of course, Giroux and Marchment, like I said, two big question marks. And of all their unsigned players, they're the main two that they would have interest in retaining. I don't really know what either of them are going to cost, but in case of Marchment, he's been not making very much money so far in his career compared to a lot of players. So, giving his season, I would think that he's going to be looking for a pretty serious payday. That might make things awfully difficult for the Panthers to retain his services as much as there be mutual interest. And we'll have to wait and see on that. Like I said, I don't know. In Giroux, I mean, is Giroux willing to sign cheap to have another shot at a cup? I mean, he did play very, very well for Florida. I mean, there's no doubt that Giroux fit nicely. I mean, he was playing wing instead of center, but he can play center for you if you need him to. Did well in the regular season, did well in the playoffs. I have no doubt that it makes sense that they could consider this. It's just how are they going to get through the cap gymnastics to make it work? I mean, Giroux's been on record to say that he would love to go back to Florida, But like I said before, and I've said it numerous times, you can't take what GMs, coaches, and players say publicly, to be completely honest all the time. They're not going to come out when he's still technically a Florida Panther and be like, yeah, it was fun, but I'm probably leaving. Like, they're not going to say that. They always say they're interested. They don't want to get into that because a lot of times they don't even know. And it's not like he isn't interested, but I'm sure he might be interested in other things too. There's been a lot of talk connecting him to go back to his hometown and play for Ottawa. I don't know if that's completely plausible either. I mean, I understand the desire to play near friends and family and be at home, and I get that. And I believe, I'm not 100%, but I believe Giroux and his wife are building a new home in the area. Obviously, that's where he intends to live when he retires down the road. But you know what? At this point, it's difficult to say. In Ottawa's rebuild that they're going through, does it make sense for them to add Giroux right now? Or does it maybe make sense for them to consider a move of that nature in a couple of years from now when they're already being able to take a step? And it's more of a move you make when you're kind of getting into the playoffs, but you're trying to get over the hump to go deeper in the playoffs, and they're not there yet. So I don't know if that's the most logical thing, but there apparently has been interest there. So we'll see. I'm sure other teams would have interest in Giroux. He's been a very productive player and still has lots to give. So I don't know if they're going to be able to keep these guys. Like I said, somebody else is going to have to end up going if that's going to be the case, because I don't know if Giroux's going to sign too cheap. I mean, he's not going to make as much as he did before, but even if he still wants, even say $5-6 million at least, that's a problem. So, they need to figure that out, and I don't have the answers right now, but I would think that answering that question of whether or not they can find a way to retain these guys is one of the bigger ones they need to ask themselves and figure out this offseason. Now, like I mentioned, could there be other moves made to free up space? There's been a lot of talk about a Sergei Bobrovsky trade, and that the new regime there in Florida isn't the most fond of goalie Bob, and that the $10 million contract, which unfortunately they inherited from the previous regime here in the Panthers organization, and it's not even, I don't even think it's fair to say that they completely have faith and trust in his abilities to be the goalie that gets them over the hump and hopefully win a Stanley Cup. At least that appeared to be the case from reports we had seen going into the playoffs. So, because there was some reports that they would love to be able to trade Bobrovsky. The only problem is that contract also comes with a no-move clause. So it's, pretty tough to do. I mean, for one, it's a lot of money. Number two, he has to agree to it. So you might just be stuck with this guy, for another 4 or 5 years. So I don't know. I mean, there's reports that they'd like to. I just don't think they can. And as much as that would give them a ton of flexibility, because they have Spencer Knight waiting in the wings, and if Knight can be that guy for them in between the pipes while he's younger and making less money, that would be an awesome way for them to save some salary cap space and make the rest of the team stronger. But that's going to be awfully darn hard to do. Now, like I said, besides Bobrovsky, where that's unlikely, well, who else could be cap casualties that they could maybe consider moving? And trades that we might see to free up some space so they have at least an option to bring back guys like Giroux and Marchment and sign their RFAs. Could a guy like Patrick Hornqvist maybe be one of those players? I wouldn't think that they'd want to move a guy like a Duclair or a Bennett, but they're not making like oodles of money, but they're making mid-range salary. But do they want to give up Duclair or Bennett or one of those players, Reinhardt, for a guy like Giroux or Marchment? I would think probably not. I mean, Marchment's a little bit of a unique skill set, I think, but and Giroux's got all the experience, and you want to keep him. But I don't know. Like, are you really a better team that way? So, in the case of Patrick Hornqvist, with 1 year left on his deal, as much as that probably makes the most sense and it gives you the biggest flexibility there, he does bring an element that a lot of these other guys don't have. When you talk about the Lightning having that will and desire to push themselves, to win, that's what Patrick Hornqvist brings, and it's one of those intangibles you can't really measure. So I'd be careful there, but at the same time, I understand why he might become a cap casualty. And I guess the other big question to me that they have to really ask themselves is, can they win with this core group? I mean, is Ekblad, Huberdeau, Barkov, are they the right guys to be able to get over the hump and go through a team like Tampa next year in the playoffs to become more of a powerhouse here in the Eastern Conference. Playoff hockey is not the same as regular season hockey. It is way tougher, way more of a grind, as much as the regular season can be as well. It's even more so. The intensity ramps up significantly. The schedule condenses even further, and it can be hard. It's like a war of attrition out there. And when you have guys that are not necessarily, if they're not willing to pay the price and block the shots and do all the other little things that you need to do to win, then that's what you're going to ask yourself. And I'm not convinced that this team can't win with those guys. I know Barkov is one of the better two-way players in the game. You have Huberdeau, you have Ekblad. I mean, I have no reason to right now to question their heart and desire, but you need to see a little bit more on the ice where they're doing some of the things you saw the Lightning players do to make sacrifices for the best of the team and not just trying to skill your way through it, because as much as skill is a big part of today's game and it's super important to be able to score those goals, it's a lot tougher in the playoffs and a lot more challenging, and you need to have those other factors as well. You need a good balance, in my opinion. So, they have tons of skill, which is awesome. They just you got to wonder, are they missing that missing ingredient, just that drive and determination and will, like we see with the Lightning, to push them over the edge? And how do they go about getting that? It's not going to be easy to make really a lot of changes to this roster. Like, they're kind of put themselves in a spot here by getting a lot of the players they have, that there's not going to be a ton of change just because of the tight situation. Like I said, there could be some mid-level players that you might see swapped out, but then I'm going to ask yourself, are you really getting better if that's the case? Like, you're not trading Huberdeau, you're not trading Barkov, Ekblad, Bobrovsky's got the no move, but then you got like your Reinhardts and your Bennetts and your Duclairs and those middle players like that. Are you going to be better without them, or depending on what you bring back? Like, I just don't know. Changing up that mix is really that big a deal. So we'll see. But the Panthers certainly have lots of questions. Can they find that will and desire? They're not going to have a ton of change, I don't think, on this roster. Mainly going to see a couple of players, whether or not they come back, being the biggest questions they face, and who's going to be behind the bench. Is it Brunette? Is it somebody else? Is Brunette there in a different capacity? We're waiting for time to find out. And I said we may know by the time this makes it to YouTube, so look for the pinned comment. Let me know your thoughts on the Panthers offseason down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.